Hello and welcome back to iSpy 360's webinar series. Today is Tips Tuesday, and I'm lucky enough to be joined by Michael Day to talk about the future of the internet. So Michael Day is a well-known figure with nearly 45 years experience in the property industry. He says he started when he was 3 years old. He is a fellow of RICS and was the inaugural chairman of the residential faculty. He is also a fellow of the NAEA and ARLA and holds an MBA from Reading University. Having held partner and director positions at AC Frost, Prudential and Connells, including their subsidiary Conveyancing Direct, Michael founded Integra Property Services in 2003, providing a range of business consulting, mentoring, training, and marketing services to the property industry. Mike is also a director at Techlet. Now, Michael's 850 plus client list is a who's who of the estate agency world, and he is also an experienced judge at many industry awards, including the IBP Journalism, Property for Media Journalism, Negotiator Magazine, and LFS, now Inside Conveyancing Awards. Now, he is also a regular contributor in the written trade media and a guest on numerous podcasts and webinars. He also enjoys a significant following on LinkedIn and Twitter. In 2020, he became a founder member of the charitable foundation Agents Together, which is focused on helping those in the estate agency industry with healthy minds and healthy businesses. So we are so lucky to have him with us. Thank you so much for joining me, Mike.
Frederick, lovely to be here. I didn't recognise myself.
So, first thing I really wanted to ask you was, what made you choose to get into the industry? And could you just tell us a little bit more about your background?
Sure. It was a long time ago, and I was 16 actually when I came into the industry. And it wasn't so much that I chose to come into the industry. I wanted to get out of education at that stage. I wanted to get out into the big wide world, and the opportunity arose to join a small local firm of estate agents. The key driver for me was that I was going to do day release and do my surveying qualifications and whatever at the same time. So I wasn't completely stepping out of education. But it was fortuitous because I came into a small business, gave me a fantastic grounding, some really good people, and I loved it. I was pretty successful at it, and bluntly, here we are, literally this Christmas, it'll be 45 years later. So it's a long time.
That's amazing. So I know you wrote a paper at university exploring the effects of the internet on the real estate industry about 20 years ago. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, when I was a director at Connells, I put myself through an MBA program at Reading University, and which was one of the best things I've ever done. Absolutely fabulous. And part of that was you have to produce a large research project, a dissertation, and I chose the internet and its effect on estate agency. And what you've got to bear in mind is back then, this is around about 2000, so 20 years ago, only about half the population had an email account. Rightmove was just in the process of being launched. So, and I would say that probably 50% of estate agents didn't have their own websites. So this was fairly early on in the process, and it was an area of great interest for me, and it's remained an area of interest and that, for the last 20 odd years.
So where it was 20 years ago, what sort of changes have you seen happen in the context of the infrastructure of the internet itself?
Well, of course, the main thing that's changed with the internet is access to it. In so much that, as I say, around about half of agents didn't have websites. Only half the population had an email account. There were organisations like Yahoo and AOL were the big sort of providers, as opposed to where we are now. So it was relatively early in the process. In fact, I put Connells on the internet in 1996, and I remember my fellow directors thinking it was going to be a fad and not that important and whatever at the time. Of course, 4 years later, we were one of the founders, investors in Rightmove. And of course, now nobody would be out there in business without some form of web presence in terms of marketing, and also obviously using the web, cloud-based systems and everything else in terms of how they run their businesses.
It's incredible sort of the changes that have come into place. But then sort of looking forward, where do you think we could be going over the next 20 or so years?
This is crystal ball time, of course, which is always fun. I think one of the biggest things that's happened in the last 20 years since the internet really took hold is obviously speed. So, the speed of access to the internet has changed quite dramatically in that time. We now have, a lot of people have sort of fibre to their houses and this sort of stuff, super fast broadband. So that's improved a lot of things and is allowing things like video to become, much more usable. 20 years ago, I mean, a video buffered and stuttered and whatever, and was almost unusable. And the other aspect, of course, is mobile devices. That's been the big change. And so everybody's got, something in their pocket now where they've got access to bluntly everything in the world. So that's been the big changes to where we are now. What always amazes me is that, we think about where we're going and everything else, but it actually usually does take longer for it to become fully adopted. There's always the first to market. Probably the better position to be in is almost a fast follower. Let somebody else make the mistake and then jump on the back of it. And then you've got the sort of the long tail of people who eventually catch up or bluntly go bust because they haven't caught up. And if we look forward, 20 years is obviously a hell of a long time. Clearly, I won't be in the industry any longer at that stage, but hopefully I might still be around to have a look in from the outside. I think the sort of areas we're likely to see grow are the use of artificial intelligence, AI. I think things like augmented reality will be areas that improve. And I think the confidence of everybody to use platforms and software or whatever is increasing all the time. Clearly, 20 years ago, the people who were homeowners 20 years ago, they were maybe, let's say they were 40 years old now. These people are now retiring, they're 60 years old. And it's the next generation that's coming through. The research 20 years ago showed that actually the biggest users were actually people, obviously the younger generation coming through at the time, and perhaps the older generation who were using access as they've done through things like Facebook to keep in touch with families and bits and pieces. But now that's all grown up, and so now everybody uses the internet. My grandchildren, I've got grandchildren as young as 3 who are, accessing children's YouTube and things on a mobile device. So that's where it's changed dramatically. And that will obviously, in my view, clearly that will continue. For our sector, for the property sector, I think some of the systems and whatever will need to or will offer more and more opportunities to join up processes. At the moment, it's still a bit fragmented. People use this over here and this over there. And I think there'll be much more integration and joined up thinking, much more cooperation and collaboration between providers in order to achieve that. And I think that agents will more and more do the heavy lifting through their software products, but hopefully will still retain that personal element and free up their time to provide more of that personal element. So I think service delivery will get better. There may be less players, but they'll probably be better rewarded and service delivery will improve.
Incredible. Now, when it comes to Proptech and the internet, would you be able to tell us a little bit more about how those two elements are connected?
Well, I mean, if I go back, you've only got to go back, well, even now, but go back 10 years ago, everybody was running their own website, for example, probably off of a server in their basement or whatever. And of course, now everybody's using AWS or some sort of cloud-based server system. Everything is being built that way. And in fact, anything that isn't in that space would now be regarded, obviously, as a sort of a legacy system. So, and the capacity has grown enormously for everything. So those are that's where the internet and Proptech clearly sort of work very closely together. And the ability, as we get the speeds improved, so, we've seen super fast broadband or whatever, clearly we've now got 5G coming around the corner. And that's not just going to move it up a notch, that's going to move it up a hundredfold or whatever. So suddenly things that we haven't even perhaps yet fully thought out are going to become reality, because the speed and processing power and whatever else will be there. My brother's in tech in California. He lives in Silicon Valley, involved in chips and whatever over there. And, the driverless car, that the driverless car is not that far. It exists now, but it's not that far away. And camera technology, look at the camera in an iPhone now. That's the equivalent of a sort of a really high-end SLR camera from maybe 10 years ago. And now we've all got one in our pocket. So, a lot of this will be what we've already got, but just improving it, the speed and the cost. Moore's law says that, speed, what I think it's something along the lines of capacity or speed doubles every 2 years and price halves. And that's the way it's going to go.
It's incredible stuff, and like the changes from cameras to sort of just speed are going to affect everyone. But how do you think it's going to impact real estate agents trying to work with these changes?
Well, I think that the property sector has obviously, this is going to be a generalisation now, because there are obviously some tremendous innovators in the industry and people at the cutting edge. But it's also a fairly conservative, with a small c, industry. I do quite a lot of work with the legal providers and they're probably even a step or two behind the estate agent side of the thing, because they're perhaps not so involved in the front end sort of marketing. But I think the big areas for the property sector are going to be in how property is marketed, how we interact with the customer. We're already in a 24/7, 365 sort of environment. I go onto Amazon at 8 o'clock tonight, I press a couple of buttons, something arrives on my doorstep the next morning. And so we're getting more and more demanding and expecting of speed and service. But of course, the process, the home buying and selling process, is a little more complicated than that. It's become commoditized to a degree, but there are certain elements you can't commoditize. Somebody needs to, well, you can commoditize, you could do more than you are. I mean, you've already now got lawyers, for example, high-end lawyers who are using AI to read documents, and they're learning. This stuff learns, and therefore they're using processes that means that they can read, for example, a complicated lease, and the machine can read that lease more accurately than the lawyer can, and pick the bones out of it, etc., etc. So I can see that sort of thing happening even in the conveyancing market, which would help speed it up. But I think we're probably realistically 5 to 10 years away before this becomes anywhere near mainstream.
It is really sort of exciting stuff. And then when it comes to real estate agents adapting and taking tech seriously, do you think it's a case of sink or swim?
I think ultimately it will be. Short term, probably not quite, but we're already seeing the move away from the high street office, for example. And what you've got is a situation where estate agents, the majority of models, charge on success. So they take no fee, they don't get paid unless they perform. And they're carrying very high fixed costs, usually people, premises, and to a certain extent, portal advertising and Proptech. And I think all of those 4 Ps are subject, particularly with COVID, it's started to focus the mind a little bit on this, and people saying, do I need this? Where should I be putting my money, etc. Retail, Amazon, by far the biggest retailer, obviously doesn't have any shops in the high streets, and we've all got used to going online or, and dealing. So we're seeing the same pattern in high street estate agency. I think we'll still have high street estate agents 10 years from now, but there will be less of them. They will probably cover larger territories than they do now. So instead of having an office in every other high street, there might be more regional sized centres where you can go and visit, you can have a meeting with somebody and whatever else, but there's not enough of a market in a small location to justify that can't make the profit out of it, and make the investment. So I think the days of having an estate agency office on every station on the tube line is going to erode. And we're seeing that happen now, but that I think will accelerate. So that'll be a big change. And I think the other change will come in the marketing side of things up front. I Spy, for example, and the use of video has obviously grown enormously as the speed and access to it has become much easier. It's very easy for somebody with their mobile phone now to produce a pretty decent video of some description. So that's happening more and more. I think that will accelerate again. Some of the products that are out there are probably overcomplicated, but I think it will bed itself down. But if you take the buying process, a buyer used to walk into an estate agency office, say, I'm looking for a property in your town, because they didn't know what the estate agent had on the market. Of course, now they've seen everything on Rightmove or Zoopla or on the market or whatever. So they know, they don't go into the estate agent's office. They'd go in, they'd sit down, they'd talk to the agent. The agent would then arrange to show them around some properties. Well, already, partly because COVID driven, but we're already seeing the perhaps more enlightened agents using, say, video and things like Zoom to conduct viewings remotely. And as the first stage. Now, nobody's going to buy a house because they've seen a video, but they can narrow down the funnel. So they start with all these, and then they get down to the ones that are actually worth them seeing. The agent can then spend more time with that person really holding their hand, and their hit rate in terms of closing deals will improve. Agents started to do this in March when we got locked down. We got unlocked in May. And if I'm perfectly honest, a lot of the industry has simply slipped back to the way it was doing things at the moment. But that will change because the momentum and the direction of travel is clear.
And especially as we get more sort of lockdowns coming in different parts of the country. I mean, we've seen ourselves with our I Spy Live, when you can do a video call inside a virtual tour. Agents love it. They don't have to leave their house. They can show someone around the property. So they're showing more people, more properties in less time without having to spend money. It's a really useful way to just make sure that
And I think there's an education piece here. So one of the reasons that estate agents quite like showing lots of people around a house is it satisfies the vendor. So the seller puts his property on the market and he wants lots of people to come and view it. Now, in reality, does he really want lots of people, or does he just want the one who's going to buy it at the right price and whatever? So there's an education piece that needs to come along with this, and that's why it will take a little while. But from everybody's point of view, in terms of productivity, better use of time, etc., it makes sense to reach as many people as possible. And that's what the internet and some of these things do. They give you incredible reach, but it's then getting that reach and monetizing it. It's not just throwing loads of stuff against the wall. It's actually sorting the wheat from the chaff and getting it down to a result that satisfies everybody.
Exactly. So when the industry are trying to sort of adapt to technology, do you have any specific tips or advice you can give to agents who do want to pick up the technology but have no idea where to really start?
Well, let's face it, it's a crowded marketplace. And everybody tells you they've got the, obviously the latest widget or the best thing and whatever else. And one of the things that I think affects all businesses, and the estate agency industry is certainly falls into this, is a lack of planning. A lot of businesses don't have a basic business plan for their business, so they sort of rock up on January the 1st and they just hope that this year is going to be a bit better than last year. Now, of course, this year everybody's been called out by COVID, and that's forced everybody to reappraise their businesses. And a lot of my clients have looked at their business and said, hey, do we need these premises? Do we need this technology? Do we need to be spending this money? Should we be doing this with our people? And I think Proptech and technology overall should be part of that. So my starting point would be to say, what is it we want to achieve? What is it we're setting out to try and get to? and then looking and seeing, is there currently a way of doing that? And is that way better than whatever it is we're currently doing? And it may well be that elements of Proptech are part of that solution, but it's not something I'd rush into for anybody. I'd research. These are big decisions. If you take a CRM system or some sort of software that's used by a sales or letting agent, you can change, but it's quite a big decision to change, because it becomes embedded in almost the culture of your business. So it really needs to be sat down and run as a project. And there may be particular things that do, and can they be bolted in? My role as a director at Techlet, we have a platform that works with lots and lots of different providers through using API type technology and whatever, so that people can work with people they want to, but it's all part of the same joined up process. And that integration and collaboration is absolutely key to the way forward. Rather than having to repeat, for example, even as simple as entering the same name and address in 5 different places. Well, you don't want to do that. You obviously want to be able to run it all the way through. So that's where I think the changes will be, and that's what people need to be thinking about.
Definitely. And when it comes to using the technology itself, do you think there's any specific devices, either known or unknown, that are going to really become integral to real estate?
I think the days of the desktop are obviously disappearing now. They're disappearing now partly because we're not going to have premises, perhaps, in the way that we do now. So that's been a big change. So we're almost certainly looking more and more at mobile technology of some description. Now, currently that's sort of smartphones and tablets and whatever, and I'm sure there will be further developments on that type of thing. If I'm reading a long document, for example, I still prefer, I'll get here, I still prefer to print it out and read it rather than read it off a screen. But we're starting to see technology that sort of replicates books. So we started, if you take a Kindle, it's got that sort of dull, sort of parchment-like, so it's easier to sit there and read something on that type. We're starting to see devices that have 2 screens and open like a book, so that you flip, so it's got that same sort of tactile feel. Because I think there's still got to be this sort of thing that works for us as a human being. So I think screen technology has improved drastically. Battery technology has improved drastically. I now have an iPace. I now have an electric car. Well, unthinkable a couple of years ago because the batteries would not have been good enough. So all of this stuff, it's not brand new, but it's all accelerating.
Exactly. And that's the exciting thing, especially with batteries, you can just go for hours, if not even sometimes days, using whether it's a phone, whether it's a camera, all these different kinds of equipment. So how would you, if it was you, how would you convince someone who didn't want to sort of update or change with these rapid advancements in technology? What would you perhaps say to them?
Well, I would go back to what I said about planning. I say, okay, right, so you need to plan your business as you see fit. And then, of course, I think that when they look at that and they see the competitive forces that they're up against, the market forces that they're up against, they'll realize that actually standing still is going backwards. Now, it doesn't mean to say that they have to embrace everything that's out there, every bell and whistle and whatever else. But I think, they will be going backwards. And so the imperative will become, actually, we're going to go bust. We're going to go out. We will go out of business. Now, not necessarily today, tomorrow. So what's the exit plan for that business? If you don't want to do this sort of stuff, that's fine. But perhaps you ought to be planning to get out. And how do you get out? So it all comes down to sitting back, maybe with a piece of paper and a pencil, but coming up with a plan. And I think so many people are so busy in their businesses, blinkered, head down in their business, they're not taking the wider view. And that's a generalization. There's obviously a lot of people who are. And you can bet your bottom dollar, out there amongst your competitors will be people who are. And perhaps they're going to steal a march on you, and your market share, your business, ultimately will erode. Loads, the world is littered with examples. Blockbuster Video, well-known example, carried on, shops, people renting a video. Had the opportunity to acquire Netflix, didn't take it. What happened? Wiped out. Nokia were the leaders in mobile phones by a million miles. Everybody had a Nokia with that awful ringtone in their pocket. Ignored the arrival of the smartphone and virtually disappeared. They're now back with smartphones, but they virtually disappeared. Kodak, what a company, film company, ignored the arrival of the digital camera and thought everybody was still going to use a piece of film. These are huge, multi-million, billion-pound companies that made a complete ricket of the thing. So you imagine down at the local level, relatively small local business, well, we're going to see the same thing happen, but it doesn't have to be that way if people think about it.
Exactly. And then when it does come to competitors, what do you think an agency or a realtor could do to set themselves apart from the competition?
Well, that, of course, is the key ingredient, the USP, the differentiator. Let's be perfectly honest, if you go on Rightmove or you go wander down a high street or whatever, it's often difficult to tell the difference between one firm and another, except for the name and the colour of the logo. They all look the same. So why would somebody choose you? Now, it could be that elements of Proptech are a differentiator for people, and they could be playing that. It almost doesn't matter what it is. It's a bit like, if an estate agent says, I advertise on Rightmove, well, that's almost whoopee-doo, because it's almost a given. Not quite, but Rightmove obviously has a huge chunk of the market currently. So it's not really differentiate. The fact you're on Rightmove doesn't really differentiate you from the firm next door. In fact, not being on Rightmove and telling people why you're not on Rightmove and the advantages or whatever that you come up with would probably be more of a differentiator. So it's finding those differentiators. And the biggest differentiator still in our industry is people. Because if I'm working for firm A, I'm not working for firm B. And so if you want me, you have to deal with firm A. So we need to use all of this technology and everything else to reach more people, to process things better. But at the end of the day, people are still at the heart of this. In the buying and selling, this is people buy with emotion. It's an emotional decision. They use logic to justify their decisions, but ultimately it's an emotional decision. The reason why people move, they've lost their job, they've got a new job, they've just got married, somebody's died, they've got an extended family. These are all sort of emotional type things that a computer system doesn't really deal with terribly well, but a human being can. So I see services becoming more almost counselling services. I'll put my arm around you and see you through this thing, which is why we're seeing a growth in what's called the self-employed model, the individual agent who perhaps doesn't deal with hundreds of people, but he has a small, solid following, and he provides a very personal service, possibly under the umbrella of a larger organisation, a Keller Williams or an EXP or Fine and Country or whoever else is in that space. But you get that individual, and that individual, you've bought into that individual, and they're going to look after you. And therefore, the tech and everything else needs to support that aspect.
Exactly. Not to get sappy, but you're looking for a home, not a house. And then having that realtor provide that, we're really going to help you and see you have that longevity with that property.
Yeah, and of course, agents that have been around a while will tell you that, high amount of their business comes from recommendations, comes from people they've dealt with before, or people who've said nice things about them. It's why we've seen the growth of review sites like Trustpilot and, Google reviews and that. These are very powerful marketing tools these days. And it's true. So again, what can an agent do to get more of those reviews. Now, there's technology out there now that will help you manage and get those reviews. And that's certainly something, like, even at the most basic level, if you don't want to buy into, you know, augmented reality and all the other sort of stuff and AI and whatever, at the basic level, getting more people to say you were fab and put it out on Google and Facebook and wherever else, brilliant.
That's it. Through and through, it's that communal sort of space on the internet where people can talk and communicate to each other that really helps get properties out there, get people to know your brand, all of that kind of thing.
If you're going to make a big purchase, you know, whether it's a car, a guitar, a television, a house, it's probably not an impulse buy. It's probably something you've been thinking about doing, and therefore you're doing research. You know, whether how deliberately or otherwise, you're doing research. Therefore, we're all being seen by people all the time, and people are forming a view on the company, the product, or whatever else. They may not be talking to you, so you may not even know that they're looking. So you've got to be there with that space. And one of the big things that's happening now is obviously things like social media. You know, obviously powerful tool. Probably we're going to move into a phase with social media where it's just dominated by adverts, which will, you know, bluntly upset us all and we'll all turn off again. But but there's clever stuff you can do with social media. You know, I mean, you know, some of this stuff started with things like being able to remarket with through Google. You know, so I've looked at sheds. Every time I switch my computer on, I get sheds thrown at me, you know, and so you've got that type of, you know, fairly basic widget, but you can now nurture people through the journey depending on how they're reacting to your content that you're putting out, and take people from this sort of position here to the point where they're going to make a decision, and they'll make that decision with you. So there's a lot that can be done in the marketing field to help differentiate.
Now, my last question that I wanted to ask today is the big one. It's about sort of COVID and how that's impacted people's behaviours, their interaction with Proptech, and how they behave with the internet. Do you think, I think you've already spoken a little bit about this, but do you think there's going to be sort of more permanent changes, or that agents may just fall back into their old ways?
Well, as I said earlier, I think for now, a lot of agents have fallen back into their old ways. When in March, I was running a lot of meetings with groups of agents, and we were talking about, you know, because we were locked down, suddenly, you know, everybody was on Zoom. Half the people had never heard of Zoom, you know, and now everybody uses it every day. And so there was a lot of change. Video tours, all this type of stuff was becoming prominent because we couldn't go and do physical appointments, offices weren't open, remote working. Now, in that time, we came back to work fairly early in May, and a lot have just slipped back to the old way, but not all. And some of my clients have embraced some of these changes and are running with them now, and I have to say, are ahead of the game now because of it. And others are going to have to play catch up. I've had clients of mine close premises or amalgamate premises. One of my clients is an outsourced lettings property management business, and they suddenly realized that they could have all their people working from home. They didn't need their rather expensive offices in the southeast. Their lease was coming up. They've taken the opportunity to go. They've retained a very small office presence in case they need to meet somebody or whatever else, but basically everybody's working from home. It's also meant that instead of having all their employees on the edge of London, with the higher wages and everything that comes with it, they've now got staff working in Yorkshire and Lancashire and other parts of the country where perhaps wages are less high, and they are therefore able to have really good quality people at slightly lower costs than they were getting them in London. So, and that's about planning. That goes back to my thing about planning. So COVID, in my view, is the biggest paradigm shift since the arrival of the internet. Okay? But it won't happen overnight. But trends that were already happening, like the demise of the high street, will be accelerating. Things like the use of technology will accelerate. People, I think we may operate with less people, but they'll have to be better. So we'll have to train them better. We'll have to get them qualified. There'll be improvements in the quality of people. So the use of portals, instead of scattergunning my marketing spend across wherever, I'm going to start measuring where my return on investment is much better. And therefore I'm going to say, I'm going to go over here, or I'm going to do this, and I'm going to be able to monitor it. Most people know that half the money they spend on marketing is wasted. The problem is they don't know which half.
And that's it.
That will change.
It's brilliant. It's really sort of exciting ways for just how the entire industry is going to change quite quickly. But with just an overall user experience is going to get better, agent experience is going to get better. It's just going to become so much more efficient.
Yeah, I think I mentioned sort of 24/7 and TechLet. Over 40% of the stuff that goes on through the platform takes place outside of normal business hours.
Mm.
So that's extended the working day so that agent, instead of having to spend all day chasing people for things, it's being done overnight. And they come in the next morning and it's been done because the consumer has access to it. At the moment, the vast majority of systems that an agent uses, the actual customer, the seller, the buyer, the landlord, the tenant, doesn't have access in to that system. And therefore, they're having to go through the agent. Well, some of this stuff, people are quite happy, as they've shown with Amazon. I don't have to actually walk down to a record shop, as they were, showing my age, to buy a CD or download or whatever I want. I can just go on, I can hear a snippet of it, and I can press the button and buy it. And that the same sort of steps will happen in agency.
Now, we have a few questions that have come in from our audience. Would it be all right for me to ask you some?
Of course.
Fantastic. So our first question is, what kinds of tech do you use personally for your work?
I use a diary with a pen and paper. No, because I'm not an agent now. I'm obviously, I use email, and I've got a smartphone with lots of tools on it like Slack and various things, and Zoom, and so I'm using this type of technology that we're working on here. So I'm using video technology for meetings and stuff. I've moved all of my training courses online, because of course I can no longer hire a hotel room and put 30 or 40 people in a hotel room. It's just not currently possible. So I've broken my training into bite-sized pieces, and I deliver it on sessions online, and that's working fine. So I use that type of technology. I have a very basic CRM system where I've got a database of all of my clients and customers, but I'm really still an Excel and Outlook man in terms of technology. But I'm not really representative of the people I'm working with. And so, my agents, clients and whatever, of course, are using more sophisticated CRM systems, well, some of them anyway. And they're embracing, obviously, things like video technology, because I'm not marketing to a consumer. All of my business is B2B. I'm in a slightly different situation. But that's a conscious choice. So going back, what I do have is a business plan. Mm. So when COVID happened, I'd already been considering moving my training online. COVID, if you like, twisted my arm, sped up the process, and I invested and did that. Mm. But it was going to happen anyway. It's just sped it up.
Exactly, definitely. So our next question is, what, in your opinion, would be the top 3 innovations to affect the bottom line?
I think anything that does the heavy lifting, is a phrase that I've used a lot. So anything that doesn't need, if you like, a human being to do it. It's a bit like car factories. Cars are predominantly built by robots these days. Now, they used to be built by hand, and they used to fall off the end of a production line rather than drive off the end of a production line, because the reality is the robot can do it better. It's faster. So where those opportunities exist in an estate agency, and you can automate and whatever, I think automation, heavy lifting, yes. It'll make people more productive, and they'll be able to do the things that at the moment machines can't really do. So I think that is crucial. And I think the other areas of technology, the big one, are using it for reach. our ability to reach customers, obviously with the use of the internet and various platforms, is way, way better than it was. So we can hit a bigger audience much more quickly. You know, I mean, for me, with my business, because I'm a B2B business working with other businesses, you know, I use Twitter and LinkedIn a lot. And I can reach 35, 40,000 people there, you know, in, you know, a nanosecond or two. You imagine writing them all a letter in, you know, sticking a stamp on it. I mean, it's, you know, it's that type of thing. And then how you nurture somebody from having reached them to the point where they make a decision making. And that's where AI and some of this stuff can come in. There's some very good products out there that at the moment 1 or 2 people are using, which take people through this journey. And databases, most estate agents, if they've been around for 10 years, 20 years, have got a database of customers that they've dealt with, you know. And still, the majority do very little with that database, very little. And yet they're spending a fortune trying to get more people. Well, that's fine. You always need to be filling the pot again. But there's so much more they could be doing to engage with their existing database. And that's true of all businesses. Now, at the basic level, that could be sending an email newsletter out once a month. But it could be much more sophisticated than that. You can track the response. You can follow the eyeballs and see what they're up to. And then drop something else in front of them that moves them along the journey. So those are the areas I think that I see as being the easy wins, because they're available now with a bit of thought.
Exactly, they are out there. Now, someone has asked, is there something tech or otherwise you wish you had tried earlier rather than later in sort of your day-to-day work?
That's an interesting one. I think that I spoke earlier about whether you're a first to market or a fast follower and whatever. And I've always kept a very close eye on what's happening, but I've not always been the first to embrace it. But where it's good, I have been a fairly fast follower. And I've looked to take what was clearly a good idea, hopefully, and refine it and work with it. To answer the question, is there one piece of, probably not. I can't think of a specific widget or something that is there. I think the future is going to be things like you're going to be walking down the road or driving in your car, and you're going to if you're looking for a property, you're going to be linked into a portal or an agent, and it'll pop up and tell you that 25 Acacia Avenue that you're just walking past is on the market. So it'll be like an augmented reality for sale board. So instead of driving down the street and seeing a for sale board, it will tell you that it's for sale. And you'll then be able to click on it, and then you might then be able to walk through the house without walking through the house, and this sort of thing. So I can see that happening. We might need driverless cars by then, so that people don't have a crash as they drive along the road. But so I think there's going to be some really sexy stuff in the next 5 to 20 years. But at the moment, I still think it's down to getting what we're currently doing refined and better.
Now, my last question for today's session is, if you could give one piece of advice to someone starting out in real estate, what would it be?
Develop a thick skin. My nickname is Rhino because I have a thick skin and charge a lot. But no, I think they need to know what are they standing for? What is their why? What is it that they're offering? So, and then what are their USPs, their differentiators? Technology might form part of that. It might be other elements as well, but they need to stand out from the crowd. Otherwise, the risk is there'll just be a sea of sameness. And, people can do okay in a sea of sameness, but you'll never break the mold. People in our industry, if you think Purple Bricks, Michael and Kenny Bruce, who I know very well, started Purple Bricks. Now, we won't get into an argument about whether good, bad, or indifferent. Obviously, they're not, in many respects, they're not the most popular. that was predicted in the dissertation work that I did, that a service like that would come along. It took 20 years, nearly 15 years for it to actually appear. They made some mistakes, but they were also highly successful, and they are still Purple Bricks, although the Bruce brothers are no longer involved. They're still really the only national brand across the country. Okay, and most estate agents are small, localized or regional businesses. Even the Connells and that of this world operate under half a dozen different brands across the country. So Purple Bricks broke the mold there, and did something different, payment up front. Now you can argue whether it's good, bad or different, but it was a differentiator. They used very aggressive advertising techniques. A lot of the existing agents spent more time on the property websites whinging about Purple Bricks than they did thinking about their own businesses. And whatever you think of them, they're there. Now, so somebody else coming in needs to find something that sets them apart. Clearly, one of those things will be them as an individual, okay, because they're different and they're nobody else. But they really need to find something that is going to set them aside and that they can make people understand, separates them from, sorts the wheat from the chaff.
I think that's a fantastic note to end on. That's really great piece of advice, and I'm sure our audience have learned a whole host of really important information in today's session. So thank you so much, Mike, for coming along and joining me today.
That's my pleasure, Frederick. It's been great. Thank you.
My pleasure. So it's wonderful to have you. Now, for everyone watching at home, that concludes today's Tips Tuesday session. So thank you so much for coming along. We will be back again on Friday for our Future Friday session, which is as usual at 9 a.m. Pacific time. So until then, do please stay safe and stay healthy out there. And as usual, keep it 360. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye.